This is lesson 1, mitosis. Now, typically you would write a quiz on this in a couple days that follow, but that's not going to happen this time around for obvious reasons. I think it's important that we take a look at mitosis so that you have a better understanding. I want to take a look at the two lessons that'll give you a better understanding of how people inherit genetic disorders. So when you're doing your research for your paper and they start talking about recessive traits that are carried and stuff like that, you'll understand how the person who has like cystic fibrosis, how they develop cystic fibrosis or muscular dystrophy, how that works. So we're going to go through mitosis first, so we understand how cells divide. Now these are some selected parts of your textbook that offer support for what we'll be covering today. If you want to, you can pause and read through this. No cell division, no U on page 5, 6, holistic and analytical ways of thinking on page 7, and the advantages of the microscope on page 7 and 8. Again, it's just supportive material. You don't need to read it, but it might help further explain the topic. That's also true for the cell cycle on page 8 to 9, although that is what we're going to be going through in this lesson. We all started from a single cell that was formed from our mother's sex cell, which is called an egg or ovum, and it contains 23 chromosomes. It combined with our father's sex cell, which is called a sperm or spermatozoa, and that also contains 23 chromosomes. That one cell has then multiplied trillions of times to make the person you are today, and each of those cells carries the exact same DNA, 46 chromosomes. Inside your body, every single cell, regardless of what kind of cell it is, contain 46 chromosomes, and they are identical to one another. Those are the building plans for how you are going to look, what color your hair is going to be, your skin tone, your eye color. Every single cell in your body contains that information, those 46 chromosomes, 23 that came from your mother and 23 that came from your father. So it starts off with a human cell with 46 chromosomes, and it goes through interphase, which is going to be duplicating the DNA. Then we go to prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis, and then at the end of mitosis, we wind up with 2 human cells, each which have 46 chromosomes. So now we're going to go through each one of those steps, one at a time, so that you can write down in your booklet what happens in each step. And you're also going to include a diagram as we go through. So phase 1, interphase. Chromosomes are copied. The DNA found inside the nucleus is copied, so the cell will contain 2 sets of identical DNA. That's information needed to build a person. So this is what our diagram is going to look like that we're going to include in our booklet. So pause now. You can include the text and also write down your diagram. Phase 2, prophase. The wall that separates the nucleus from the rest of the cell begins to break down, and centrioles move to opposite ends of the cell and start forming spindles. Now I say the centrioles are kind of like Spider-Man, and the spindles are his webs. And just like Spider-Man uses his web to grab onto things, centrioles will form spindles to grab onto the DNA. So you can pause now and copy down the text and include the diagram in your booklet. Phase 3, metaphase. The spindles connect to the chromosomes and then they are lined up in the middle of the cell. They've been lined up in the middle because in the end, they have to have a copy of each chromosome. So they're carefully lined up in the middle to make sure that each nucleus that will eventually form will have every copy of the DNA. Because if they aren't divided up equally amongst one another, that means that that cell will not function properly. So to make sure that each cell has the exact same DNA, they're neatly lined up in the middle before they eventually will be pulled apart to opposite ends to make 2 new nucleuses. Copy the notes now. In phase 4, called anaphase, the DNA is separated. The centrioles pull the DNA and its copy apart, directing it to opposite sides of the cell by the centriole spindles. Pause, add the notes to your booklet, and include the diagram. In phase 5, called telophase, the nuclear membrane begins to form. The nuclear membrane is the wall that will separate the nucleus from the rest of the cell. There's a little notation on here for what we're seeing under the microscope, that this cell is undergoing telophase, but also cytokinesis is occurring at the same time, because we can see a pinching of the cells where those two little arrows are. We're not going to include that in our diagram. We'll just show a cell with new nuclear membranes forming. So pause now, write down the text, include the diagram. And the last phase is called cytokinesis. The cell will separate into two cells, each with a nucleus that contains identical DNA. So in our diagram, we have a cell that is partway through cytokinesis. Pause, take down the notes and the diagram. Now, in a normal year, there would be a quiz on this material, and you would have to be able to give the name of each phase, know the order of the phases, and know what happens in each phase. So off the top of your head, you should be able to say interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis. Interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis. And know them in that order, know the names, know what happens in each one of those phases. Interphase, DNA is copied. Interphase, prophase, nuclear membrane breaks down, centrioles start to form spindles. Metaphase, middle phase, the DNA gets lined up in the middle. And then anaphase, the DNA gets pulled apart. Interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, the nuclear membranes start to form, and then cytokinesis, the cell starts to separate. So that's off the top of my head. So you should know all 6 stages in order, be able to recite them off the top of your head, and have a general idea of what's happening in each one of those phases. That is something that will come up in future health science or biology classes with Miss Cooper, and she expects you to know that because it gets taught in grade 9. Now, how do I remember the order? Interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis. I prefer my awesome team Cincinnati. That's just a little acronym so that I remember the first letter of each one of the phases, and then from there it's just fill in the rest. I've got the first letter, I have the order down. So the assignment, if you were in class, you'd have to come up with your own saying, or you could just use mine. I prefer my awesome team Cincinnati. You would have been given the rest of the period to study. I would recommend in class taking a piece of paper and you write it down over and over again until you can write out all 6 phases from memory without having to look back. And once this becomes easy, you could potentially start quizzing each other in class, and then make sure that you had studied the night before and got into class early, because that's one of the strategies we've talked about, is that when you have a quiz, you should come into class early, sit down and review, just so it's fresh in your memory. So when you write the quiz, you remember exactly what it is that you had done. So that's it. Interphase. Our DNA starts to duplicate inside the cell. Prophase, centrioles form spindles. Nuclear membrane starts to break down. Metaphase, DNA gets lined up in the middle. Anaphase, it gets pulled to opposite sides. Telophase, 2 new nucleuses form. Cytokinesis, that cell starts to split into 2 cells. And we wind up with 2 cells with identical building instructions for how to make that human. And that's happened in your body trillions and trillions of times. Because initially, when your father's sperm cell met your mother's egg cell, 1 cell was formed. And that 1 cell became 2, and then those 2 cells became 4, 4 became 8, 8 became 16, became 32, became 64, became 100, and on and on. Until you have the trillions of cells that you have in your body today. That's the end of lesson 1. Still doesn't explain how we get genetic disorders, but it lays the foundation so that we will, when we get to that lesson, understand how genetic disorders happen.